to use everybody's first name as if
You can
you're
call me Joe from Bear, if that's easier.
Joe from
Get that all
Bear.
there.
Joe from Bear. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and specifically how you got into data.
Yeah, sure. So Joe Colangelo, CEO, co-founder, Bear Analytics. We developed a platform called Bear IQ that plugs into the event tech you're already using to surface findings to grow revenue, audience, tailor your marketing. We're getting more into the marketing attribution and AI side these days. And I got into data kind of via events. I was on the planner side working for a large trade association that ran kind of dozens of events internationally. And, those events, we had a senior leadership team that was really focused on knowing our numbers. And so I ran a little bit of a data team over there. My co-founder Eric and I kind of made the determination that events wholeheartedly are under measured, and we were going to be the ones that did something about it. And that was, 10 years ago now. Yeah, here we are. We're still fighting the good fight.
Well, I love hearing that that you were with an association and there was value for data. So there are organizations out there that do not only value data, but also have a path and a strategy for data, which I think is really important and we'll get into today. Now, Joe from Evolio, tell us about your path, who you are, what you do, and how you got here.
Sure, yeah. So Joe Fetterbush, president of Evolio Marketing. Based in New York, we do, surveys, measurement, research, you name it, for show organizers, for exhibitors, industry suppliers. So we get to touch all, parts of the ecosystem, of the event ecosystem, which is pretty cool to get those kinds of perspectives. The path how I got into data is a very long time ago. I just kind of stumbled upon it, a summer job in high school, working for a company called Exhibit Surveys back in the day. And had some just brilliant mentors and coaches there who, kind of took me under their wing to start doing stuff in data and measurement and trade shows and events. And it just kind of blossomed from there.
Oh, awesome. Well, I have a sweet spot for the data, but specifically the stories that you all have shared with me over the years in terms of just successes, failures, what you would like for people to do and what the potential is. Now, Joe from Evolio, I want to let's just start with the very basic. What's the value, right? Like, we get the value, and I think a lot of our guests today know the value as well. But I think we always think of it, what will you gain if you do data? But sometimes I think what we don't talk about is what you will not gain from not thinking about data and involving data in your strategy. What are what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I love the way you position that is, what happens if you're not collecting data or the right data, because you don't know what you don't know, of course. But it's really nice when working with companies and shows and brands that aren't collecting the data, and you have quantitative data to prove their successes or identify ways to improve. So then you flip the script to say, like, now, hey, you had a 20% increase in likelihood to do something, or a 40 net promoter score, whatever the case may be. Then you say, now picture if you weren't measuring this. What would your perception of your event or your, experiences be that whether you produced it or whether you sold exhibit space, whether you were an exhibitor or sponsor? It doesn't matter where you are in the ecosystem, but picture now not having this data. Picture, we always talk about, like, with exhibitors and sponsors, picture if you weren't exhibiting in this show, how you would not have that increase in brand awareness or that potential revenue from people, from those leads and things like that. So huge impact of not collecting data. My favorite quote is, feelings aren't facts. And we hear it all the time. Well, I feel like this show is blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And it's like, feelings are great. We all have them, but we shouldn't be making really, really important multi-million-dollar decisions on our feelings necessarily.
Right. I hear you. Now, Joe at Bear, we teach this class for PCMA, event measurement and analytics. And one of the things that you talk about in that class is, if there's anything you do, is don't do data, right? Don't not do data. No, don't not do. There's too many negatives for me. But you really hit that point about how it's a must. It's a necessity to have that data strategy. Talk a little bit about why that's important and where to begin.
Yeah, so I think from a consciousness standpoint, I don't think there's a lot of people that are walking around going, I don't need to be data driven. I got this. I think in general, everyone has some element and desire to be data driven, and then it comes to the self-assessment. Well, where are you on where you want to be? And invariably, 9 times out of 10, they go, we're not where we want to be. Even the folks that objectively you're like, wow, you're actually doing quite a bit, they still aspire to do more. And I think that all is starting to come back to the fundamental belief that events in general are more part of the marketing funnel than ever. And so when you talk about experiences and experience design, whether it's online or in person, one of the most tangible things that you get from those are the actual data. It's truly an asset. And so when what we talk about in the course in terms of getting started, it's largely driven by what is the overall outcome you're trying to do. Put a framework together. What are the KPIs that roll into that outcome? And that's if you're starting from scratch. But in today's day and age, just because of the volume of data that's being generated, I know a lot of folks kind of maybe don't look at their information as it's the most clean that it could be. I've been doing this a long time. Trust me, it's a lot cleaner than it was 5 years ago. It's cleaner than it was 10 years ago. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But as an industry, as an industry that uses and is adopting more technology, we're directionally correct. It's just not super intuitive and easy yet. And that's what we're trying to do.
And so you talked a little bit about all this data that's there, and I think most of us are feeling like there's a lot of it, especially in the last 2 years. We're just exposed to more of it, just with the technology and being able to export and import and all that good jazz, and just having just too much data, and it's just everywhere. So what does an organization do? Joe with Evolio, it's where do you begin? How do you start figuring out what do I need to do with this data?
Yeah, I think the biggest and most important thing is ask the right questions, to your clients, to your customers, internally, however you're collecting and going to be analyzing data. Which data is most important? What are you trying to solve for? Is it defining successes, measuring ROI, just number of attendees, qualified buyers, whatever the case may be? You start off with what are you trying to accomplish? Then do you have the correct data or data sets to help you get there? We see so often that they start with, okay, we have all this data, then let's pick through it and figure out what's most important, which is a good plan B. But the plan A is really to go into this thing. What data do we need? What decisions are we going to make from it? What data is actionable? And what data is rudimentary? And to your point, Vinu, is there's been so much data the last couple of years, and a lot of it honestly has been such rudimentary data that we're so happy to have data that we forget that it's not really actionable data. It's just a lot of data.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. There's that next step where it's okay, I know what I want to measure. I have the data sets that I need. And then it's even before you even do any of the calcs, it's okay, if the data's in your favor and it says, keep doing this, what are you going to do? If it says no, jettison it. Are you going to jettison it? I'll tell you right now, it's hard for marketing folks to do that. It's really hard to go, what, actually, these emails aren't performing. We need to change tactics. I'm going to actually do less. I think there's a benefit in that. If you adapt to more of an agile mindset, you'll really start to see those kind of decisions come out.
Now, I'm talking with a lot of associations that are when we talk to them about just technology and the data that we want to bring in and what do they want to find out, and they want to know everything. They want insights about everything. They're just all over the place. And a message that I like to say is keep it simple and, have an area that you focus in on. How do you all feel about that? If you do have to focus in on an area for an association who has a conference, multi-sessions, it's about member, non-member memberships. Where do you begin? How do they keep it simple?
I mean, go ahead. Yeah, go nuts.
All right. Well, I think you'll put the cherry on top, just knowing what BearIQ does with data. But I mean, we look at it as there's work streams, right? Like attendee acquisition is going to have a work stream, exhibit sales and sponsorship sales is going to have a work stream, education, content, et cetera. They're going to have their work stream. So they should have unique data sets that are going to be important, relevant, actionable to them versus, just an executive saying, hey, all we care about is number of attendees. So it really should be broken down into those work streams that are relevant and that can help you can make decisions from. So, understanding your audience, your attendee profile can really help shift and shape the type of education that you're offering. Maybe there's more millennials, Gen Zs, maybe there's more women versus men, like there's shifts in audience demographics and personas. And then like that kind of snowballs and has a domino effect into like the rest of the event, the experiences you deliver, things like that. So you could start with some of the most basic information and let it work into those work streams to expand and evolve your event and the experiences.
Yeah, my favorite saying in this bucket is perfection is the enemy of progress. And if you take the same, let's pretend we have two associations, they're exactly the same. Right now, the traditional kind of data track is let's go around the entire organization, ask everyone what they want, right? And so you end up getting, no surprise, a large volume of needs requests. Well, then we're going to come through and we're going to prioritize this. And it's very much in the let's onboard an AMS or a large kind of enterprise level tech mindset. And so 6 months goes by and you finally have your list. That's association one. If we took the same exact association two and said, hey, you're going to work in 2-week sprints, come up with the questions that you can get done in 10 working days, then we'll look at the responses, come up with another set of questions, that organization will not be 6 months ahead. It will be quite literally years ahead of the first organization. And we're seeing that play out quite literally day in and day out. So data, bite-sized, incremental, like Joe said, stick to your track. Focus has got to be the greatest 5-letter word ever when it comes to this stuff, especially when getting started. If you're trying to, drink out of a fire hose and get and make everything available to you, you will not move. And unfortunately, a lack of momentum here is where most data initiatives go to die.
Now, Joe, you talked about the sprints, and that's I find a very techie kind of concept. And as a meeting planner, before I got into this tech space, I didn't know about sprints. I have my event in 6 months. I go until I drop, right? Like that's just how it is. Talk to us a little bit about those sprints. Like, what is a sprint? What is this concept that you're talking about? Like, put it in bite-sized work
Sure.
groups. Talk a little bit about that.
So firstly, no one has failed more at sprinting than we have. We started doing it before we became a tech company, when we were more of an agency and consulting company to improve, brought on project management software, went through 3 or 4 platforms, and it was always it's the technology problem. Spoiler alert, it was an us problem. But the idea here is with sprints, they're very simple. You come up with discrete goals that you want to accomplish in 2 weeks. The team reviews those goals at the end of the previous sprint. Right? So you got to start somewhere. You kick off with your 2-week sprint goals. Those goals are rolled up of a combination of tasks, and then you allocate the workforce and their available capacity and say, yeah, I know Johnny is going to be able to get this done in the next 2 weeks, and he's going to move from task 1 to task 2, but he can only do 3 tasks in 2 weeks because of meetings and life and everything else. And Susie, she's going to be able to get 4 things done. And ideally, you size it the right way. At the end of the sprint, there's 2 important meetings for you to have, something called kind of like the show and tell. That's where you're actually showing, hey, here's the progress, right? And then the next meeting is the sprint planning for the next sprint. And kind of, a little bit of what they call a retrospective. What did we not get done and why did we not get it done? The key there, though, is every day you're doing a team stand-up and you're saying, Johnny, are you able to move on these tasks? Is there something blocking you? Yeah, one of our vendors isn't moving. Okay, does anyone have more juice that can go to a vendor and say, hey, we actually need you to move? Susie, how are things going? Actually, good. I'm actually going to have 1 day's worth of capacity. Perfect. Let's pull from the next sprint and get you moving on that. And once you get good at this cadence, I've gone from hating it in the 2018, 2017 time frame to now I can't imagine life without it, candidly.
Joe Edivolia, have you done the sprint practice before?
Well, I think like Joe C said, we've attempted it, yeah. And because theoretically it's absolutely brilliant and it makes a lot of sense and it makes you run more efficiently. We're in the process of implementing sprints, and I think we need a sprint to implement sprints because it's
That's right.
yeah, there's definitely a mindset, it's a change of mindset to get in the groove of like really the holding yourself accountable to getting things done at a certain time. Like Joe said, when you have like life and projects and clients and all these things, on your shoulders. But yeah, it's such a brilliant way to operate.
No, and and I know I'm talking a little bit about this, but I think this is really important for change management, which, especially when you're dealing with technology and you're dealing with things that are a little bit more sophisticated than what we deal with every day. Not sophisticated, it's just different than what we typically do as meeting planners every day. And so can we workshop this a little bit? Like if I was to do my first sprint, my 2-week sprint, and Joe, you talked about having that first list of 10 questions. Are those 10 questions related to the workflow that Joe Edivolio was talking about? Like, do I maybe pick let's say my KPI is I need to increase the revenue that we're getting from non-members. Let's say that that's my KPI that I need to do. So how would I go about putting that, like designing those 10 questions in the first sprint? And then
Okay,
what
let me add one little wrinkle. A sprint doesn't just live on its own. So there's actually a level above a sprint, because think of like you're rolling out a new product feature. That feature might actually physically take more human capital than 2 weeks worth to get done. So if you're doing a big feature enhancement, that's called kind of a story. So it might take 3 months to get done, and that's comprised of 6 sprints, but you're going to have discrete kind of milestones that are broken down into 6 in this example.
Perfect.
So
in sprint 1, we're going to be talking about what are our KPIs, right?
Sure. I think you can get through what are your KPIs. You can get through where's the data located. You can get through who do I need to contact about where the data is missing. Like you can make sprint 1 just discovery. And with that focus, I would be hard pressed for you not to be able to, get that kind of sprint done.
Yeah, but it's a starting point, and I think that is the big key. That's actually one of the questions I was going to ask you all. It's like, where do you begin? And putting that into this framework of, you don't have to solve all your data questions and all your data strategy in one day. It is a process, and understanding that process. That's what you guys are going to help us out with today. Is it like, so you begin asking those questions. And so what are the top questions that we should be asking? We talked about KPIs. What are the KPIs? Where the data is? What else?
I think from maybe one of the components that doesn't necessarily get as much attention as like a fancy acronyms like a KPI or an ROI is who's Bezos when he was at Amazon, and I'm just coming off reading this book, so like this is like the latest and greatest of what I'm regurgitating, right? Is this concept of like single-threaded leadership. So like who is actually the owner of that outcome? It's very important to have, and not to be like, it's your fault, didn't go well, or you're the only one who deserves praise, but you need someone when the ship's moving, down the channel to be the person that says, I'm the person that runs the front of the ship. I'm going to let you know who's in front of us, what's obstructed. I'll let you know who's on night watch, that kind of thing. And so oftentimes ownership is something that's under indexed on. When it comes to data. And so then you have a group of people, and I'll give you a little hint, if you're sending an email and it's like, dear data team, that's a failure point. It needs to be dear Tammy, dear Mike, and then you can copy all the other people on it, but you need to get into the habit of there needs to be single-threaded leadership on these initiatives.
Now we've got our guests today are from all sorts of sizes of organizations. Some have IT departments, some have data teams, some have AMS teams, some have none of it. So what do you say to the organization that is very lean and they want to take on data? Who should own that data? In terms of event data, we want to stay in this realm of conferences and meetings. So who should be the one that typically owns that? What are you guys seeing in terms of like working with your clients?
I mean, what we're seeing, excuse me, is the person who's going to own it needs to be ultimately the person who's going to be assigning it being used. They don't have to be the end user of the data, but they've got to have the people and the team of those who are going to respond and react to the data. It's almost like we look at it, the highest level is the person who's going to really like be the data storyteller, not necessarily the in the weeds with, you know, what the specific numbers are and what they correlate with and what the questions were that they, you know, aligned to. But at that high level, there just has to be that person who's going to own the data storytelling, that's going to assign and implement how that data is going to be used to their team. Again, because when you think of it from like the event perspective, as I mentioned before, you've got sales, you've got attendance, you've got content. All those different data sources are going to be used, reused, and interpreted different ways by different people. And, you know, as you mentioned before about like ROI, for example, you know, you ask 10 different people to give you a definition of ROI, you're probably going to get 10 different answers. So it's like you can kind of step back and say, you know, if ROI is ultimately one of the objectives or OKRs, objectives, key results that you're looking for, it's sort of like the next gen KPI, OKR. If you're looking for what those OKRs are going to be from an ROI perspective, it's the return on investment for what, you know, from the attendee side, the content side, the exhibit sales side. We've been looking at more as ROX, return on experience. I mean, we have the luxury of living in this experiential world. We're not selling widgets, you know, we are literally creating experiences. And so, you know, looking at those ROX, return on experience metrics, to me are almost more important than ROI. Because if you don't have a good ROX, forget about having a good ROI.
So what are some of those measurement points? Like, how do you measure that? What are you looking for? Like, is it like if I was to ask a survey or in a register, what are those data points?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because they seem so intangible, but they're actually not. Like, you know, basically the way we accomplish it is do a survey to attendees or even exhibitors after they've experienced or even during their experience of the event itself. So, you know, if it's a 3-day event, obviously don't look for ROX answers the first hour of the show. You know, you maybe want to wait till like the second or third day or even post event. But creating metrics or KPIs or OKRs, whatever you want to call them, that are going to help you understand, you know, things that we're probably already asking, but not putting in that ROX bucket. So specifically, for example, you know, your overall rate, your overall satisfaction with the event, you know, 5-point scale, very simple. But then you could start getting into, well, first of all, what were your objectives for attending? And did the event meet or exceed or not meet those objectives? Now you're really taking a deeper dive into the experience rather than looking at it like at a very macro level. Look at it from more of those micro levels based upon what kind of experiences were attendees looking for. Some are going for the exhibits, some are going for networking, some are going for education. And when you start looking at just attendees from those three perspectives, you can develop an infinite amount of personas. Because then you start looking at their job roles and their years in the industry and their buying roles and, you know, what kind of information they're looking for and what kind of problems they're going to this event to help solve. I mean, it's just layers and layers. That's the experience that you're delivering. You know, so that's just a few examples of how to measure ROX.
And then to either of you, in terms of like, in terms of the actual mechanism to collect that data, are we talking about surveys? Are we talking about in person? What are some of the best ways you've seen that you get reliable data and easy data, right? Because after all, this is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to events. How do we make it easy for collection and for response?
Yeah. I mean, from typically, yeah, I think surveys, whether you're doing them on site, you know, tablet software, it's so nice and easy to do these days, collect that real-time data that you can respond to. So if you're finding that some of the results aren't coming back as positive as you'd like on day 2, how do you fix it or react for day 3? Is it fixable immediately? Post-event surveys. So surveys are a great tool, but we know how much everyone loves to answer surveys. as response rates are dwindling on surveys. So you want to make sure you have enough of a population to survey so that you could get several hundred responses back or whatever, relative to the population. So you're in that margin of error at a 95% confidence level that's really statistically reliable and projectable. So you're not making big decisions on what 4 people said. But I think when you append it with, registration information and more of like the Joe C kind of stuff, then you've got some powerful data storytelling.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
Joe,
we're a little bit on the other side of the spectrum, right? So we're on the transactional side. So as more platforms specialize into what they're doing for the on-site or the online experience, crafting those data narratives across platforms, and it can include, data like Joe said on the survey front. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like qualitative versus quantitative, this great, kind of like shark, the sharks snapping down the street kind of standoff, type scenario. I think in the future, we're seeing this play out right now as the transactional information gets better and more robust, then the survey information can color it in a way that's hyper meaningful to intent, perception, things that you really can't get. I mean, you just can't from the transactional data. And, unless your best case, it's maybe like an inference. I think this is because we're looking at, dwell times are different and things like that. But going back to something earlier you said, Vinu, I'm going to take just a little bit of a counterpoint. I think right now, we are in the best time ever for folks that have small teams to get into the data game. When we started doing it 10 years ago, it was unbelievably painful, and we were a small team trying to do it. Not a lot of BI tools, not a lot of open source low cost options out there. That's all radically changed. Anybody can go and set up, like a very basic cloud or large data storage account. I mean, it's really kind of unbelievable what's happened over the last 10 years. So I wouldn't think that data is just for the big folks, especially if the mantra is let's start small and start fast.
now you both kind of touched on taking data from what, the transactional data that we're used to, survey results, registration data, in session attendance, all of that. And we're used to seeing those reports and those charts, but you both mentioned adding a layer on top of that, where you are starting to identify who these people are and getting into more sophisticated data. Now, these all live in different buckets, right? And you have to bring that together. And that's where, Joe, at Bear, your platform really brings that stuff together. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between, because I don't want to assume everybody that's joining us knows the difference between transactional data and then instituting this new layer into it. Can we talk a little bit about why that's important of, what is the difference, right? And then why is it important to put that layer on and what that really tells us?
Want to take it? You want me to go?
So why don't you go, Joe? Because I think from the platform standpoint, that it makes
Yeah.
sense to do that.
Yeah, so from a transactional, so what is transactional data? So this is any data, and by the way, this is being passively generated anytime you stand up an event tech software. So common case, we talked about registration, right? The number one thing that a reg platform is going to do is it's going to allow you to create that financial transaction to allow somebody to actually get a badge and go to your event. The byproduct of that is, for us, roughly 80 to 100 different data points when that transaction happens. Things like not just who the person is, some PII, sure, that's interesting, company name, where they're from, all of that stuff, but when did the transaction take place? Did they use a code to, to convert? Did they come here via some other kind of referral link? How much did they pay? Which reg code did they purchase? Did they come back? Did they make the purchase the first time they arrived? So you get to 80 pretty quick. All of this, whether you're talking about reg, one-on-one meetings, beacons, lead retrieval, any of this stuff is happening natively in these event tech platforms and largely passively. So like Vinu mentioned, tying this stuff together is kind of where we sit, because you then get into the dedupe game pretty quickly. And so as much as folks are like, oh yeah, dashboards, tables, and charts, fundamentally, the game we're in is moving data around and getting it to speak the same language. Because if you can't do that, Doesn't matter what's on the table or the chart.
How about you, Joe, at Evolio? Like, where do you see the value in bringing that additional layer?
It's huge because what Joe was just mentioning about connecting all those data streams and data sources in a way that's going to make sense, and deduping and mapping and all that. That's the stuff that we're like, ooh, that's rough. Let's leave that to the experts. Where we come in is really like the data storytelling, the insights from all of those beautiful charts and dashboards and all this information that we have. There's the big, like, they will tell me, what do I do with it side of it? So that consulting, that strategy. So it's like, having both those are, it's like the art and the science kind of thing. They really are two different, strategies in a business. When you have data, the just the compiling of it, the analysis of it, but then the what do we do with it side of it. And yes, I mean, we do a lot of work on the other side of what Joe was just talking about, the what do we do with this information? How is this going to, get back to the sales, to the marketing, to the education teams, et cetera, so that we can continuously grow our event to be as successful as humanly possible and not be complacent with, well, we know who our audience is. We know where they're going. You probably don't.
And now it's like, honestly, now's more important than ever, because with the amount of churn that we've seen, crazy churn numbers. I mean, we're looking at this from a macro level, crazy churn numbers of people, whether you want to bucket it under great resignation, our industry's seeing more churn than others. I mean, I'm telling you, you got to get closer to your customer in these next 18 months or someone else will.
And let's talk about, so there's two aspects to it, right? In terms of the customer base, right? It's not only the organization and attracting the attendees, but also keeping our exhibitors happy, right? And giving them, they're looking for more information. What trends, and Joe Evolio, maybe you can talk about, what are you seeing from the exhibitor space? What are they wanting? What kind of data can we as an organization give them to say, hey, this is a valuable event, and this is who's coming? What do they want?
They want it all. But I think, seriously though, because a lot of the time an organizer is thinking about their show. When you think about an exhibitor could invest in hundreds of shows a year. So yeah, I mean, some of those are tier one, or like their senior prom, their Super Bowl show, that kind of thing. We get it. And maybe it's the 80-20 rule, or 80% are small shows and 20% are the bigger investments, whatever the case may be. But the point is, exhibitors are, faced with a lot of cost increases. We're seeing as high as 27% cost increases in exhibiting compared to 2018, 2019. However accurate that is or not, it doesn't matter. The point is costs have increased, and they've increased for all of us at every level, not just exhibitors. But there has to be more value. So back to the question of what kind of information are exhibitors looking for? A lot of our clients, we're talking tech, healthcare, pharma, medical equipment, manufacturing, you name it. First of all, some are not asking for information. So if you're not asking for information, it's pretty hard to get information beyond what's public and out there, like show prospectuses and things like that. But those who are asking for information, a little bit more sophisticated, they want to know quality of attendees, very basic, because so many of us default to number of attendees. And the show is up 5%, the show is down 20%, especially post-pandemic. And it's what we have seen, and data to support it and prove it, and exhibitors that understand and embrace it, is the quality. Who, we always ask our clients, who's your target audience? And, it's decision makers and CEOs and things. It's no. Everyone wants them, but they're not always the best people. So the big recommendation is, as an exhibitor, look at the attendee registration form online. What are the questions being asked to attendees? Then go to the show organizer and ask them, say, hey, we noticed on attendee registration that you're asking job roles, industries, company sizes, what they're interested in seeing at the show. Use that information to say, hey, show organizer, I want to know what percentage of the audience represents my target, and here's how I define my target. So you could get very specific to say, wow, maybe attendance is down 10%, but 60% of them represent our target. So whether it's 60% or 65%, it's still a lot of people. It also helps exhibitors make better show selection decisions or optimize their event portfolio to understand, well, you know what, we're not really investing enough in this show to meet with that volume of our targets, or we're over investing in this show thinking because 20 years ago, that was the hot show, whereas now it's not, and this one is. So that kind of data, which it exists, right? Organizers have that data, they're sitting on it. It's just a lot of time exhibitors aren't asking for it, and they need to be asking for it.
So hold.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Can I ask Joe a question on this? So Joe, you work with exhibitors, right?
A lot, yeah.
So that recommendation, you're talking to exhibitors, you're giving them that recommendation, right?
Yeah, and I'm giving that to organizers to ask, hey, is there anything we can help you with too? Yeah.
Exactly my point. So if you're an organizer on this call, he just gave you the recipe of to get ahead of your competitors. Don't wait for the exhibitor to come to you. Be proactive and reach out and say, hey, did you know we're 8 weeks out? We love what our blend looks like. Here's what our breakdown looks like. You got the data. The oil's in the backyard. Put the spigot in and just start pumping it out.
There you go. Absolutely.
Otherwise, Joe's going to visit you, and you don't want that to happen.
No, and that's great because, I think I've talked with organizers and those that sell shows and telling them, it's not about having the 30,000 people at the show. Nobody cares about the total number. It's about who, like you said, the quality and getting that data out to them. So in order to get that data out to them, are you recommending that, maybe there's more of a individual treatment of exhibitors or in a category and start go to your VIP exhibitors and saying, hey, here's data that makes sense to you. And how do you make that easy to do?
I think first ask the right questions to your exhibitors, understand who are your targets. Don't be very consultative in your sale versus selling concrete. Embrace the fact that we're back to in-person and it's not going away, but it does cost more. So let's give you a better return on your investment by, setting realistic expectations in terms of what these numbers are. It's just key. The organizers, really have such an advantage of data that they could be using and leveraging, and it's basic calculations to help exhibitors understand that, to your point, yeah, it's not just about the number of attendees, but like that quality. Where else can you see that many prospective key targeted customers and prospects within 2 to 3 days? It's physically impossible. The other side is the cost avoidance. And this is one of my favorite things about trade shows, is that having exhibitors understand when they use their space and time effectively, pre-schedule meetings, things like that, they're actually saving their company money by not having to travel and do like 50 meetings over the course of 3 months with their reps flying all over the place. Leverage those 3 days. And if the average cost of a sales meeting is, say, $1,000, and you can bang out 50 meetings over 3 days, you just saved your company $50,000. So in 3 days.
You're writing the taglines for these prospectuses, right? Now, Joe at Bear, there's everyone has a different tech stack and the ability to be able to give this information to exhibitors. And you work with a lot of platforms out there. Are you seeing the tech capability, the software that's out there, is it becoming easier for planners and organizers to be able to extract this data and just easily give it to exhibitors? What are you seeing?
So let me just count. Yeah. So the answer to that is yes. So table stakes is absolutely, now you need to be able to get your data. So if I'm the organizer, I need to be able to get my the platforms that we're using. So that's absolutely table stakes. No more like, oh, we don't allow exporting from our platform. Goodbye 2006, right? That's gone. Now you're starting to see it in a more automated fashion. So API driven as opposed to like CSV or Excel driven, but you ideally have to have both. So open APIs are very popular right now. We're actually seeing investment in APIs so that it's not, hurting performance, and there's more endpoints available and all the things that technical folks like us want to see. going back to something that Joe said, though, in terms of like what you want to deliver to the exhibitors, I can just share with you there's a couple of modalities or different ways of thinking about it. I think Joe hit the nail on the head if you're talking specific exhibitors or like different areas of the show floor where you want to craft a specific narrative. We also have customers that are just broad reaching. They're going out to their exhibitors and saying, hey, look, 10 weeks out, we're going to do an update and we're going to let you know how we're trending and pacing just to be transparent. And it's more broad based. So they're talking about things not like different reg codes, the 1-day pass versus no one cares about. They're talking about the roles and responsibilities, buying authority, the breadth of companies. Some organizations have, for lack of a better term, like an internal industry index, the top 200 XYZ in our association. We have 80% of them right now signed up, and we have line of sight to the next 90%. You have no idea how far that goes, and that's surface level. That's not going and telling Sony, here are the 30 people we think you should meet with or that fit your particular profile. This is just across the board. But doing it repeatedly and reliably showcases, one, you're willing to be transparent and own your product and future experience. And two, you have a handle on you have a command on your stuff. And so you can get started very easily, is my point.
So Joe, I know there's a lot of apprehension about releasing reg number, just the general reg data before an event because the numbers aren't where they used to be. I think we're all still kind of figuring out what's the new algorithm of when people are registering and whatnot. So what do you say to an organization like I don't want to say, give out too much because our reg numbers just aren't there. What do you say to that?
So spoiler alert, you're going to see it on site if it ends up being poor, just so everyone.
And it also creates the rumor mill,
Yeah,
because exhibitors all start talking and everyone's like, talking about it. And what we're saying, first of all, and Joe, like, let me know what your thoughts on this. So for the last year and a half, as we really got back to in-person, attendees were registering really much closer to the event date than they ever had before. What we're seeing now is, and I would love to know what you're seeing, is last like 3-4 months or so, it's sort of leveled out where like people are registering later, sooner again versus later, not quite to the 2019 levels, but it's not like that, like 3-week, before the show, like rush that was happening over the last year and a half or so. Are you seeing that too? Or are you seeing things?
No, that's right. And over kind of like a couple hundred events, I think that's accurate. It was first, nobody was like registering at all. Then it was like hyper late, and all of a sudden you went from we're 40% down versus where we were at this time last year to now we're 6% up. Holy crap, mad sprint, last 4 weeks, what have you. Plateauing is the perfect word for it, because I don't think we're going to wake up a quarter from now and go, it's 2019 again. I think we're going to be in this period for quite a while. Especially as the opportunity cost not to be in the office, not to be working from home, still kind of is, a little bit higher, which just speaks to the value prop that you need to have as an event organizer to get folks out there. So I would agree with that general statement, Joe.
Yeah, and I think we've been like to your point in your question before about like, how do you put the word out if attendance is down or the numbers aren't there yet because it's 6 weeks out, not 2 weeks out, things like that. Again, just like couple the registration information with the quality information. So if you could just simply align it with, and 70% are, decision makers, or, 35% are decision makers, another 35% are influencers, X% are director level and above, so you've got strategic attendees, you've got buyer attendees. So when you can say all of those things together versus just the registration number, it's such a better story.
I don't even know why you would say the registration number. If you're 10 weeks out and we're in a period of still kind of future uncertainty, not are we going to have an event or not, but what's the run up going to be, then just normalize everything. And just say, hey, look, we're 70% of this cohort, like Joe said, 70, 20, 10, whatever it is. Don't give them the top number, because at the end of the day, no one I know is meeting with 30,000 people on site. Yeah. If they have 100 good meetings, they'll be your customer forever.
And also to speak to the quality aspect of things, right? There's only going to be, exhibitors are sending people that are going to get more value out of a trade show, right? Whether it's on the exhibitor side or on the attendees side, right? The attendees that are coming are going to be more buyer led now more than ever. If costs are going up, I'm going to be more as a business that wants to go shopping at a trade show. I'm going to be selective about who's going to go. So it's going to be a better quality person. So being able to tell that story to your exhibitors and keeping them not only happy, but looking at the value, it's really huge.
Absolutely.
We have a question here. This one is, my org has very last minute registrants. How do we address this on a regular basis? I'm going to assume that this is from a data angle. So if you wanted to share, again, I think you all talked about this though. It's about not sharing the reg numbers, but sharing the quality of the data that's out there. But do you suggest that perhaps you wait closer to the event to share that information then?
Well, I mean, I kind of interpreted that a little bit of like, how do I get folks to register earlier from a marketing standpoint? If that's the, kind of ethos of where the questions, coming from, then you really have to have command over your campaign, understanding what's going on top of funnel, channel performance. I mean, measurement's key at that level. So if you start to see, for example, one channel is performing better for first timers, like that's something I would try to understand as early as possible in the campaign, even if the end result is the total volume isn't where you want it to be, because chances are, for whatever reason, pricing pressures, where your event's located, where does it sit in the calendar year, what industry it's in, you might not be able to buck the trend, but if everyone's going to come in late, you at least want that number to be healthy. And so if it's like, well, everyone registers the last 3 weeks, what am I to do about it? You might not be able to get the average registrant to come 4 weeks or 5 weeks out, but let's crush it the last 3 weeks, kind of, making lemonade out of lemons type mentality.
Yeah, we have another question. This kind of is a good segue into, I wanted to talk a lot about trends that you're seeing. This next question is about no-shows. Don't we all love no-shows? This one person is actually seeing more no-shows more than ever. What are you seeing in terms of trends? Are you seeing no-shows go up, go down? What are people doing about it?
So we would regularly do this work where we would take a look at, when folks were coming in, like from weeks out, and then the percentage of no-shows that registered at which point in time. And, no surprise, the number would be, a much lower percentage of no-shows the closer you got from the event or got to the event. So, if somebody's registering a week out, their likelihood of not showing, might have been like somewhere in like the 3 to 6% range or something like that, depending on how much the event cost, or if it was a free kind of buy or sell on a trade show versus, 15 weeks out, so on and so forth. Very similarly to the registration trends of folks coming later than ever, this inflection point, which used to be around 6 weeks out, where you can go, really 6 weeks out, we're going to see that number. It's going to be north of 90%. We're really going to feel confident that those are true registrants converting to attendees. That number is now moving into, I would say, the 4 or 3.5 weeks out range, kind of on average, again, depending on all those, the characteristics of your event. So getting that, what we call the second sale, even though now they've committed to you in some way, shape, or capacity, but now getting them on a plane, train, automobile to actually show up is another, I think, hurdle for the audience acquisition team. I'm not bringing any good news with this comment. I'm just sharing the trend that we're seeing, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, anecdotally, we're seeing it all across the board. Of course, it's going to vary by industry, by event, by location. The other thing that we're seeing is, and this is kind of funny, is, or maybe not, but we've seen events where like the organizer has, desperate measures because they were scared of like the attendance dropping so much, where they went from a paid model prior years to a free model recently. And yeah, the no-shows were extremely high because there was no skin in the game. Yeah.
No, it's also about understanding who those no-shows are, right? I mean, not only from a standpoint of when they registered, but also what is the value that they perceived that they were going to get or not get by not showing up, right? And again, that goes back to what we were talking about in terms of data, not doing data. What's the value of what you're going to miss out there? Same thing with not looking at the no-shows. There's deeper data there. And if that's a bigger issue, maybe that's the data that you concentrate on.
Yeah.
So what other trends are you all seeing, with the clients that you're working with, in the data that you're collecting? What are you seeing?
Folks that have increased their price have seen success doing it. The opposite of what Joe said, like the fear of, I don't want to increase my price, it's going to hurt.
For registration or
Yeah, registration. There's an inelasticity on the demand side there because of like everything Joe said. When you compare it to, because it's no surprise, folks are looking at their costs across the board, right? And so money's not free anymore. And so when they look at their T&E, they're going, wait, let's actually just kind of have like a really solid event experience and save that, 50K per meeting or 1K per meeting, 50K. And they're going, we're going to invest a little heavier in this event on the attendee side. On the exhibitor and sales side, I'd love to kind of get Joe's perspective because he works with, like the largest brands, but like macro, we're seeing things bounce back still, but the mix is different. So a little bit more downgrades, the upgrade, use case better be really compelling. And you're starting to see kind of a shift in sponsorship mix of what folks actually are doing to support that on floor. So the best way I can put it is the mix is shifting right in front of our eyes right now.
Absolutely. We're literally seeing that. And we recently did some studies around a handful of organizers as well as exhibitors. And yeah, I mean, most organizers have raised their prices, both from a square footage perspective or the shift in sponsorship packages and options. And the exhibitors, yeah, they're feeling it, but they're still seeing value and they're still seeing high value because they're also tightening their belts and, spending their dollars more or investing more wisely into the shows. Like, do we really need that 50 by 50 that we've always had? If we go to a 40 by 40, it's not the end of the world. Do we need to be shipping, paper pamphlets still to the show? Like when I see that, like the racks of like literature, I'm like, what is going on here? This is 2023, guys. So like it's made some people rethink what they're doing and how do we be more efficient with what we're doing, both on the organizer and exhibitor side.
Any trends in terms of how people are collecting data? Like, are you seeing more people not only collecting data, but I think doing the analysis piece of it? Because we've always collected data. It's now, are you seeing more people wanting those insights? Any trends there on that side of the world?
I think it's like more meaningful. No, go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
No, I was going to say we probably will have the same answer. So you go, Josie.
I mean, it kind of goes back to the earlier thought of like the opportunity cost of not doing something. I think is kind of like higher than ever. So our average kind of, if you want to put it in quotes, kind of customers like, still extremely strapped on time and headcount, still extremely strapped on resources. So, and, obviously I got a skin in the game, but if you're not beating the data drum and trying to be more efficient with, again, a resource and an asset that you're already collecting, like what's the better way of doing it then? How are you going to do it with some of these other headwinds that you're facing? So if you're not going down that route, and again, it's not like a conscious decision. We don't hear a lot of people going, that's it, data, no way, not for me, right? It's always just kind of the fifth priority, and it never moves up on the list. You know what I mean? But for those that do take advantage of it, they're seeing outsized gains because they're constrained everywhere else.
100%. The other thing that we're seeing too, which I know we were talking about earlier, is from the data analysis and analytics point of view, AI, yay! I mean, it's really the term game changer, but it really is because it's allowing data processing to be so much more efficient. From our perspective, open-ended questions on surveys. When you have, let's say, 3 open-ended questions and you have 1,000 responses, and let's say you have 3,000 comments, verbatim comments that we'd have to like go through before in a painful way. And now there's these AI tools that are not only grouping them into similar categories, but also categorizing sentiment and things like that. That's just been one of the most amazing things because we can pass that savings to our customer. So while prices are going up everywhere else, we can actually, come down in price and give you more information quicker. So win-win.
Okay. let's pretend I'm a meeting planner organizer who we've had a successful event. It's just doing fine. It always has. I have no trouble with it. Why do I need to look at the data?
You need to look at it, and probably more now than ever, because you have a success story. And, you just don't want to sit there happy with like, oh, everything's great, because guess what? It's not going to always be that way, unfortunately. So get ahead of it. Understand, what are we doing that's making this great? Like, if we're so great now and we're better than we were 5 years ago, what did we do over the course of those 5 years that made us amazing? Because now we raised the bar. The bar is higher. We have to maintain it and then slightly increase it as well. So these are the times when, you're not in a desperate position, but it gives you the opportunity to be proactive instead of reactive with data.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, well, just look at any kind of high performing private company. The CEOs of the best performing, fastest growing companies on the planet go, you know what? I really want to know less. I think our future growth is baked in, and we're not hyper focused on who our customer is, why they're coming, what they're doing when they come. And if that's your narrative that you want to sit by and stamp on, that's cool. We'll work with the next person. I mean, that's just the reality.
You'd be like, hi, BlackBerry, Sears, Xerox.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Don't forget to rewind.
Be kind. Yeah.
This hour has gone by very quickly. You've given us so much to think about and just so many things that we can actually do starting tomorrow. And I appreciate you coming on today. But before we leave, I'd love for you both to say, if you had one advice you wanted to give our organizers today, if they were to do one thing tomorrow, what would it be when it comes to data? Joe, Bear, you want to go?
I'll go first. Yeah. Figure out who the data champion is internally. And if you don't know who that person is, become the champion. It all starts single-threaded leadership.
Love that. My answer is going to be so lame now, but it's really plan. Just because there's so many ways to measure and it's at our disposal, it doesn't mean you're measuring correctly. So put the work into planning what you're going to measure, how you're going to, what you're going to do with this data. Planning is the key.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you both for coming, and for our guests who attended today, thank you so much for spending the whole hour with us. You can find both Joes on LinkedIn. I put that in the chat. We'll also make sure you get a copy of this recording, but I hope that you've gotten some nuggets today that will help you on your data journey. And remember, keep it simple. You don't have to solve all your data problems in one night. So good luck with your journey, and we hope to see you at the next webinar. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.